Hi and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. I'm going to tell you a story about two worlds. The first was my world, a place of tangible things, of solid wood and cold, hard steel, a world built by the work of my hands. The second was her world, a place of dazzling, abstract light of numbers that danced on a screen, a world built from a language I did not understand but had learned to worship. For a time, I believed she was a genius, a prophet who had led me out of the dusty, predictable landscape of my own life and into a new, golden age of impossible wealth. I was the humble craftsman who had married a magician. I watched, with a gratitude so profound it was a form of prayer, as she spun our modest life savings into a fortune. This story is about the day that second world vanished in a single, silent keystroke, taking our fortune and our future with it. It's about my desperate search for answers in the digital ruins and the horrifying discovery that there was never a second world at all. There was only the one I knew, the real one, and the magician I loved was not a genius. She was a thief who had simply built a beautiful, glittering illusion to distract me while she methodically, silently, and completely picked my pockets clean. I am a man who believes in what he can hold. I have spent my life working with my hands, turning raw, honest materials into things of function and simple beauty. My world is a world of right angles, of level surfaces, of the satisfying bite of a sharp blade into a piece of oak. It is a slow, methodical, and deeply real existence. I trusted in the slow, steady accumulation of a life, the same way you build a house, brick by brick, board by board. The digital world, to me, was a foreign country, a place of ghosts and smoke. I saw the news, I heard the stories of people becoming millionaires overnight on things that didn't exist, things you couldn't touch or see. I dismissed it as a casino, a grand, collective delusion for people who were afraid of a hard day's work. She was my bridge to that other world. She was brilliant, fluent in the language of the future that so mystified me. Where I saw chaos, she saw patterns. Where I saw risk, she saw opportunity. Our marriage was built on this balance. She was the visionary, the one who saw the distant horizon. I was the foundation, the one who made sure the ground beneath our feet was solid, and I trusted her. I trusted her mind, her ambition, her love. So when she came to me, her eyes shining with the light of a new, fervent belief, and she spoke the word crypto, my first instinct was to recoil. It was the language of the casino, of the delusion. But she was not a gambler. She was a strategist. She laid it out for me not as a gamble, but as an investment in the future, as inevitable as the internet itself. She had done the research. She had found an exchange, a platform that was, she said, the gold standard of security and innovation. It was not a place for reckless day traders, but for serious, long-term investors. I know this world scares you, she had said, her hand on my arm, her voice a perfect, soothing melody of logic and reassurance. So don't trust it. Trust me. And I did. It was the easiest and most catastrophic decision of my life. We took our life savings, the sum of 20 years of my hard, physical labor and her careful, disciplined budgeting, and we moved it from the solid, boring world of the bank to the glittering, ethereal world of the exchange. I watched her make the transfer, my heart a tight, anxious knot in my chest. It felt like I was watching her take all the bricks and boards of the house we had built and toss them into the ocean. The first few weeks were a period of quiet anxiety for me, but she would show me the portfolio every night. She had a special laptop, a sleek, powerful machine that was her portal to this other world, and on its screen I saw our number, and I saw it grow. At first it was small, incremental gains, but then it began to accelerate. The numbers, which had once been a source of fear, were now a source of intoxicating, addictive joy. The chart on the screen was a beautiful, soaring green line, an arrow aimed at the moon. My skepticism, my old-world lunch-pail morality began to feel foolish, antiquated. She was a genius. She had seen the future and she had invited me into it. Within 6 months, our initial investment had doubled. Within a year, it had multiplied tenfold. We were, according to the glowing, triumphant number on the screen, millionaires. The number was so large, so abstract, it felt like a dream. We began to live inside that dream. We planned our new life. We would sell my dusty, noisy workshop. We would buy a piece of land by the sea and I would build our final home, a masterpiece of wood and glass with my own hands. I would work not for money but for joy. We were free. The gratitude I felt for her was a thing of profound, almost religious intensity. She had not just made us rich, she had rewritten our entire future. I would come home, my body aching from a day of physical labor, and I would see her, the magician, the alchemist who had spun my sweat and sawdust into a river of gold. I was a man in a state of perpetual grateful awe. I had no idea that the beautiful, soaring green line on her screen was not a map of our success. It was a lie. A beautiful, elegant, and perfectly programmed lie. The dream ended on a Tuesday. It did not end with a bang, but with a quiet, digital whimper. She came to me in the evening, her face pale, her hands trembling. It was the first time in our entire crypto journey that I had ever seen her look anything but supremely, brilliantly confident. "There's a problem," she said, her voice a tight, strained whisper. "A big one." She told me there had been a market event, a black swan, a sudden, catastrophic, and completely unforeseen crash. The words were jargon, meaningless to me, but the look on her face was a universal language I understood perfectly. It was the look of pure, unadulterated fear. "Show me," I said, my own heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat of dread. We went to her laptop, the magic box that had been the source of all our joy. She opened it, her fingers fumbling on the keys. She navigated to the website of the exchange, the beautiful, sleek portal to our fortune. And where there had once been a login screen, there was now only a stark white page with a single, brutal sentence. "Error 404. The requested URL was not found on this server." "It's gone," she whispered, her voice a hollow, broken thing. "It's all gone." I stared at the screen, at the digital tombstone of our entire future. The number, the beautiful, soaring number, was not just zero. It was a ghost. It had never been real. It was just a series of pixels on a screen, and now even the screen was gone. In that moment, my own grief, my own terror, was a distant, secondary thing. My first and only instinct was to hold her. I saw her not as the architect of this disaster, but as its primary victim. This was her world, her area of expertise. The failure, the loss, it would be a wound to her soul far deeper than it was to mine. I had only ever lost money. She had lost a part of herself. "It's not your fault," I whispered into her hair as I held her shaking body. "You were a genius. The market was a casino. The house always wins. It's not your fault." I spent the next few days in a fog of shared grief, my primary role being to comfort her, to shield her from her own sense of shame and failure. We were a team, and we would face this together. We had lost everything, but we still had each other. The fortress of our wealth had crumbled, but the foundation of our love, I believed, was unshakable. When the initial shock began to subside, my own mind, the mind of a builder, a problem solver, began to stir. I needed to understand what had happened. Not out of blame, but out of a need for closure, for a rational explanation for an irrational event. I needed to see the blueprint of our own destruction. I started to do my own research. I, the Luddite, the man who barely knew how to use a search engine, waded into the dark, confusing waters of the crypto world. I searched for the name of our exchange. I was looking for news articles, for press releases, for the angry, screaming forums of other investors who had been wiped out. I was looking for the digital footprint of our shared catastrophe, and I found nothing. Not a single mention. No news reports of a major exchange collapsing. No blog posts from financial analysts. No social media threads from other victims. It was a ghost. A multi-million-dollar financial entity had vanished from the face of the earth, and no one in the world seemed to have noticed but us. The first tiny, poisonous seed of a new kind of fear began to sprout in my mind. The story did not make sense. This was not a market crash. It was a magic trick. I remembered her words from a lifetime ago when she had first convinced me to invest. "Don't trust the crypto. Trust me." I had trusted her. And now, for the first time, in a way that was so terrifying I could barely form the thought, I began to wonder if that trust had been a mistake. I knew I had to go deeper, not into the abstract world of the internet, but into the real world of our own finances. I had to follow the path of our money, the real money, the money I had earned with the sweat of my own two hands. I had to see where the bricks and boards of our life had actually gone. I felt a profound sense of shame and betrayal, not from her but from myself. I was about to commit an act of espionage against the woman I loved. I was about to become a spy in my own house. The investigation was a quiet, secret, and deeply shameful affair. I felt like a man breaking into his own home, searching for a thief, with the sickening, growing suspicion that the thief was me. I waited for her to leave the house, for one of the long, aimless walks she now took, her face a mask of tragic, beautiful grief. Then I went to the old, dusty filing cabinet where we kept our real-world financial records, the fossilized remains of our old life. I needed to find the original wire transfer records, the proof of our initial investment into the exchange. I found the statements from our old, traditional bank account, and I found the transfers. My heart was pounding as I read the details. I was expecting to see a single, large transfer to a well-known financial entity, but that's not what I saw. The money had not gone to one place. It had been broken up, sent in a series of smaller, sequential transfers to a dozen different entities. The names were a meaningless jumble of generic corporate jargon: Global Synergy Holdings, Apex Strategic Solutions, Innovate Forward LLC. They were not the names of financial exchanges. They were the names of ghosts. They were shell corporations. My blood went cold. This was not the footprint of an investment. This was the footprint of a crime. This was the work of a money launderer. But the money being laundered was my own. The next step was the one I had been dreading the most. I had to get into her laptop, the magic box, the source of both our salvation and our ruin. I had never touched it. It was her sacred object. But I knew her password. It was the name of the street we had first lived on together. The irony of it was a physical blow. The computer opened and I felt like an archaeologist opening a tomb. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just started clicking, opening files, trying to make sense of a world I didn't understand. I searched for the names of the shell corporations from the wire transfers, and I found them. I found the incorporation documents. They were all registered to her through a series of anonymous agents in states with lax corporate disclosure laws. She hadn't invested our money, she had hidden it. But it was the other files, the ones in a folder simply labeled Project, that finally definitively destroyed my world. Inside was not the evidence of a crime. It was the evidence of a creation. I found the design files for a website. The logo, the color scheme, the layout. It was the website for the exchange. She had built it from scratch. I found the folders of stock images she had used, the pictures of smiling, professional-looking executives, the generic charts and graphs. I found the code. I am not a programmer, but even I could understand what I was looking in at. It was a simple, elegant piece of software. It was a fake interface, a dummy terminal. It was designed to do one thing and one thing only: to display a number and to make that number go up based on a simple algorithm she had written herself. It was not connected to any market. It was not tracking any real assets. It was a video game. And then I found the back end, the control panel. It was a simple password-protected page, and on it was a single input box labeled current balance. She had not been a crypto genius tracking the markets. She had simply been logging in every few days and typing in a new, bigger number for me to see. The beautiful, soaring green line, the arrow to the moon, our entire fortune. It was all just a number she had typed into a box. The crash, the error 404 page, that was just the final part of the program. It was a kill switch she had built into the code from the very beginning. A digital self-destruct sequence designed to erase the evidence and complete the illusion of a shared, catastrophic loss. And then, in a final, locked subfolder, I found the real story. I found the real bank statements. A series of accounts in her name only, in offshore jurisdictions with impenetrable banking secrecy laws. And I saw the real money trail. Our life savings, my life's work, wired from our joint account to her shell companies. and from there into these secret, untouchable accounts. She had been systematically, meticulously, and completely robbing me blind, all while I was sitting next to her, my eyes wide with a foolish, grateful awe, watching the beautiful, impossible numbers dance on her screen. The confrontation was not a storm. It was the quiet, final click of a lock on a prison door. I waited for her to return from her walk, her face arranged in the now familiar mask of shared, tragic grief. I did not move from her chair, from her computer. I simply turned the laptop to face her as she walked into the room. I had opened the control panel, the back end of her beautiful, fake world. The cursor was blinking in the input box, the box labeled current balance. She saw the screen, and the mask did not just crack, it evaporated. The grieving wife, the failed genius, the partner in my sorrow, all the characters she had been playing for the last 2 years vanished in an instant. And the woman who was left was a stranger, a creature of pure, cold, and utterly unnerving composure. She looked from the screen to my face, and in her eyes I saw not a flicker of remorse, not a hint of shame. I saw only the cool, detached assessment of a master strategist whose brilliant, foolproof plan had just been undone by a single, unforeseen variable, me. "You were never supposed to look behind the curtain," she said, her voice not a whisper of confession but a flat, cold statement of fact, as if she were chiding a child who had opened his Christmas presents in November. "It was a beautiful story," I said, my own voice a hollow, dead thing that didn't feel like it belonged to me. "A masterpiece. You should be proud." "I am," she said, and there was a flicker of something, a genuine if terrifying pride in her eyes. "It was a perfect plan, it was elegant, it was clean." "It was a lie," I said. "It was a theft. You took everything I had ever worked for, everything we had ever built, and you turned it into a ghost." "I took what was mine," she said, her voice taking on a new, sharp edge of condescending justification. "I was the one who managed the money. I was the one who made the sacrifices. You were just the labor. You were the man who hammered the nails. I was the architect. I simply designed a new house, a better house, and I used the old materials to build it." The contempt in her voice was the final, brutal blow. She had never seen me as a partner. She had seen me as a resource, a strong back, a pair of calloused hands, and a trusting, simple mind. I was the raw material for her grand design. And what was the plan? I asked, a morbid academic curiosity the only emotion I was capable of feeling. After the crash, after the shared grief, what was the next act of the play? "The quiet, amicable separation," she said, her voice still a calm, rational explanation of a business plan. "The two broken people who had lost everything and who just couldn't make it work anymore. No fault, no blame. We would have gone our separate ways. You to your simple, honorable life of sawdust and sweat, and I to mine. The life that my money paid for," I said. "The life that you stole." "I didn't steal it," she said, and her voice now held the patient, weary tone of a teacher explaining a complex concept to a very slow student. "I liberated it. The money was trapped just like I was, trapped in your small, safe, boring world. I set it free. I set myself free. It was never about the money. It was about the freedom to be someone other than the carpenter's quiet, sensible wife." I looked at this woman, this stranger, this brilliant, beautiful, and utterly soulless creature, and I felt the last lingering embers of my love for her turn to cold, hard ash. There was nothing left to say. There was no shared ground, no common language. We had been living in two different universes all along. Mine was real. Hers was a fiction she had written, produced, and starred in. And I was just a minor, supporting character, a fool whose only role was to finance the production. I stood up and I walked to the door. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and the hollowed-out space where a life used to be. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice holding not a trace of emotion, but the simple, logistical curiosity of a project manager tying up a loose end. I turned and looked at her one last time. She was still standing by the computer, a queen in the ruins of her own beautiful, fake kingdom. "I'm going back to the real world," I said. And I walked out the door and I did not look back. The legal battle was a short and brutal affair. My evidence was absolute, a perfect, self-contained narrative of her crime. But the money, as my lawyer had predicted, was a ghost, vanished into the labyrinthine world of offshore banking, beyond the reach of any court I could afford. She disappeared, a brilliant con artist who had moved on to her next mark, her next production. I was left with the wreckage. The house was sold to pay the legal bills. I was broke, I was alone, and I was a man who had been stripped of his own history. I went back to the only thing I had left. I went back to the wood. I started over not as a business owner, not as a husband, not as a millionaire. I started over as a man in a small, rented workshop with a set of old tools in his own two hands. The work is slow. The progress is incremental, but every board I plane, every joint I cut is real. It is honest, and it is mine. I lost a fortune, I lost a wife, I lost a future I thought was real, but in the quiet, dusty silence of my new, smaller life, I have found something that I had lost along the way. I have found myself, the man who believes in what he can hold, and that is a form of wealth that no one can ever steal from me again. Thank you for tuning in to Reddit Whispers. We've all faced moments when everything felt broken. What was your turning point? Leave it in the comments, because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now.